Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast.
You're listening to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 68, Brand Using Call Centers, How Do They Smash Results? And we're going to look at this from the perspective of brands who are working with external call centers today and are ultimately trying to see better conversion rates and better sales. Simon, I think before we kind of dive into the tactics side of it, we need to establish the kind of a few ways of like looking at this, which we need to kind of clarify.
Yeah, so effectively when brands are using call centers, which is how most lead generation happens, as in it's going into a call center, it's either the call center buying leads or data, or it's the brand buying the leads and the data and feeding it into a call center. So the process is slightly different, but effectively that's the two ways that it runs.
Yeah. So what we'll do today is, well, I'm sure we might look at both, but we'll begin by looking at what the brands who are listening to this need to think about when it's the call center who are buying leads.
Yeah. So let's start this with clarifying how this process works. So a brand has decided they want to use outbound sales with inbound leads, potentially sales process. So they will contact a call center and start working with them. And that process can take quite a long time because there's a lot of compliance involved in it. They're really rigorous with the wording that the call center uses. They really align it to the sort of sales process and branding and everything else that the brand wants the call center to use. So they'll go through the script, the sales process, the software they access, absolutely everything. I mean, I've been involved in this several times. It can take months. It's incredibly rigorous. Anyone listening to this who runs a call center that's been involved in the process will know what I'm talking about. And so what happens after that is, in terms of the data that the call center is going to be buying, it's usually like, is it going to be compliant? Can you make sure it's opted in and stuff like this? But as we know, that isn't necessarily good enough for the really good lead generation leading to really good sales. So what I'll go through is just some quick tips that a brand can use that is using an external call center or call centers, because a lot of them will use multiple ones. You ready for this? Should have done that with the music. You're ready for this?
Yeah, I can't edit this afterwards. I'm not. My editing skills not up to that.
So the first thing that they need to think about is, if you're using multiple call centers, you need to dedupe the prospect list, because there's all sorts of problems that you can face if you've got two call centers that you're using to drive sales and they both buy the same person as a lead coming into them. So they contact the same person. So the brand needs a central mechanism to be able to dedupe those leads. So all leads at all times should come brand first and then go to the call center. So they need a system to be able to do this. A bit like Datavault, but other systems are available. And the first thing they need to do is dedupe the lead. Make sure they've not had it as a prospect already, and then they can fire it out real time to the call center. They need to suppress any leads against current customers. So if they're already a current customer, the call center doesn't necessarily hold their database. They could do, but generally that wants to be done brand side. So suppress it against your current customer base. The brand needs to track the source of the lead, whether that's like a code that's given to them if they don't have the full name, but they need to see, in the same way that a call center does, the granular sources, subsources, keywords, ads, everything that are generating leads. If it's a code, it doesn't really matter, but just so they can then track where sales are coming from. They need to collect the email address of every lead that's coming in. So when these leads are being bought, the call center just needs to say, I want email address with this as well. And the reason is that a brand can then just push that into their marketing function, which really doesn't happen very often because the sales and marketing teams can be very siloed. If they can set this process up, lead comes in, dedupe, suppression, track, push the email address into a marketing team and start a nurturing funnel for any leads that aren't pushed to a sales mechanism. And then they just you can do all of that in real time and then push it out to the right call center. So if you're using multiple call centers, you can do stuff like by geo, because obviously there's an accent bias. So someone in Newcastle is more likely to buy from another Geordie. So the brand needs to think about pushing it to the right call center if they have multiple ones. If not, if it's only one, just push it to that call center. And then they need to make sure they get feedback from the call center. So obviously they know the sales that are happening because it's usually their systems that it's happening on it's being updated. So they need to use that mechanism to push the sales back, or ask the call center to push the dispositions back up so they can track all the results against all the leads. Stop emailing anyone that says they don't want to call, whatever else. Remove the email nurturing from anyone that becomes a sale, and now they can see the whole sales process from a lead generation point of view, not just what the call center is doing.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. As you were talking about that, the thing that kind of made me think of, and we've talked about this loads before, but in this context is worth looking at, is it's almost like friction between the lead gen side of it and the sales side of it. I guess if you're outsourcing to an external call center, like that friction might, I guess, be even greater. That sort of that siloing of the two. So how can, if I'm a brand listening to this, how can I guard against that? Like, are these the tactics, or is there other things you can do to sort of remove that friction?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point, and it sort of goes back to the thing I mentioned at the top with the process that a brand will go through to start working with a call center, and how rigorous that process is, where they literally go through everything, the compliance, how close the desks are to each other, whether there's water available in the corner, the wording they can and can't use is like massive, the process it goes through. But then for a lot of brands, they'll then spend zero time thinking about that actual marketing process to drive these sales, which is the lead generation process. So if I was the brand, the way I'd think about this is I'd want to, personally, I don't know whether every brand would want to do this, but I'd want to sign off all the marketing process. I want to know every single source, the assets they're using, the wording that's being used, how they're going to generate the leads. Because what I'm looking for is conflict, like you mentioned, between the sales process that I've 100% controlled, and how that aligns with the message and the positioning and the marketing that's going out to generate those sales. So one thing they could do is ask to see all the ways that leads are being generated, ask for changes where possible, make sure that the messaging aligns with the sales process it comes in. But the other thing is, for the brand, you need to use your own assets where possible. Like, as much as possible, your brand, your wording, your message, what's going to happen when a person fills the form in and becomes a lead. And the reason is, we've covered this in multiple podcasts, is the halo effect of awareness that is generated around the brand as part of the lead generation process is huge. It's absolutely massive, and nobody ever takes any notice of this. So you'll see, we've talked about, they'll pile billions into display advertising. And effectively, the lead generation process is doing very much a similar thing, but you're not even paying for any of it. It's just literally like a side product of generating a lead that then goes into the sales process. So if you can use your brand as much as humanly possible as part of that, it will transform the sales process, because the messaging, like the targeting, the brand, it's all 100% aligned with the sales process that's happening. So obviously you can't do it every time, because there's a lot of lead generators that you're going to be working with, won't do it, they have their own brand. And so what you're relying on is like the vertical awareness that they're coming into. So if you're a broadband company, you're getting a lead of someone that wants broadband. It might not be your brand, but it's, they want your type of product. But where possible, always use the brand. And that's why you need to, I wouldn't say invest as much potentially as a brand into the marketing process that you do the sale process with the call center, but you really need to sort of dig into it. And as we know, by a factor of 18, the size of the brand that's being used to generate leads has the biggest impact on the ROI. So, all you're doing is massive awareness of the brand, reducing the cost to generate a lead, and increasing your conversion rates.
Also, just to interject there, because I think of this from the perspective of someone who focuses quite heavily on the branding side of it. What you've raised there is the opportunity to transform results and improve them. But also, the flip side of that is, if you're not doing it, there could be an impact in terms of harming your brand if you're not in control of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you don't know what people are doing with your assets, how they're using it, like, forget about how you can improve things. It's almost like just make sure you don't harm your brand like that. That would be massively bother me, I think.
I mean, the first thing I'd do if I was a brand using outsourced call centers is build my own landing page under the brand and get that pushed out to everywhere that I can to generate leads. And then every other lead generator that I was working with, I'd work with them to, can we use our brand to generate the leads? What are the ads? Start doing it that way. Because if you remove it from just the sales process, which is how the lead generation is happening, because it's just going into the call center buying leads, and get marketing involved, it just transforms it.
So look, just raised a point there, and I say this agnostically. So if I'm pissing off any lead generators, I'm not mean to, I'm purely inquisitive about it. But it's something we talked about before. The more you talk about that kind of thing, like, you're the brand and you're also creating the page, controlling it. At a certain point, you think, does it just make more sense to just have the lead generation done by someone internally who can actually be in control of that?
It's difficult there, right? This is why lead generation companies exist, because and it's also why I think external lead generation will grow potentially, because the sort of skills needed at high level lead generations, a lot of brands don't invest in that, in marketing in that way, because you've got to, like, if you understand the mechanism of how most brands work, is this is why they're outsourcing the marketing. Is it's not marketing doing this, it's sales that are buying leads and generating leads, and they're not they don't speak to each other. And marketing basically works on brand fluffier stuff. If it's a big brand, they'll be working on adverts, working with agencies, whatever, and they just leave the sales side to themselves. And we covered this like really on in the podcast as I don't know what number it was, I'll have to go back and look, but the disconnect between marketing and sales in brands and the harm it causes. But yeah, I think so. How you potentially counter that is work with the lead generators to understand what's possible in terms of promoting your brand, because you've basically got two things: vertical awareness or brand awareness within the vertical as well. And this is the best one, the brand and vertical. But if you can't get it, and you've got a call center with 25 people in it that you're using to drive sales, you're going to have to go like vertical awareness as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it, again, something we touched on, but we just keep drilling it. It comes back to the relationships between people, between people, between the brand. Like, if you can trust lead generators, they're good ones, you work with them, you have that strong relationship, you're feeding back to each, they're feeding back to you, it's to each other. It kind of eradicates that problem to a degree as well. Just to sort of not wrap up, but before we kind of sign off today, is there anything else brands who are listening to this, like people who are working at brands, whoever they are, who are using external call centers, need to consider as a kind of final point?
I think one of the key thing is like, because I see this a lot, a big problem is they don't actually get the data. So like, I've worked with a lot of call centers and a lot of brands doing lead gen, right? Either as a providing leads or as a technology provider, and also buying leads on behalf of the brand. and like the most basic thing is usually the thing that's missed, which is they don't get the data. Yeah. As in, they literally don't get, the data that's been captured as part of the lead generation process. And that's like, rule 101 effectively. Get involved in that and do those things that we carried out, like the dedupe, suppression, tracking, collecting the email addresses, because that data isn't opted into the call center, it's opted into the brand. And so, I worked with call centers. We still work with a lot, as in they use Data Vault and stuff, so they'll license the system. But a lot of them think the data is theirs. Like in the past, probably before GDPR, I can't even remember if it's happened since, they would literally, I'd speak to people at call centers and go, we've got 50 million records in a database that, we can use what we want. I'd be like, hold on, but what campaigns was that collected on? And they'd be like, oh, it's from when we worked with British Gas and we worked with Vodafone. Mm-hmm. It'd be like, that's not your data, it's their data. What are you doing with it? And so, understanding that all this data and all this awareness that's being driven is all for the brand, it's like the first step to really getting involved, the brand in this, the lead generation process, and understanding like where the opportunities are and the problems and the benefits and stuff.
Interesting. Like you say, it's like, there's loads of angles we can look at. We talk about improving results, like that's part of the podcast, but also that gets into the realms of like harming your brand, compliance. Like there's loads of areas which you probably can't cover on one show, but there was a few. Hopefully, people listening, there's a few tactics there that they can use. Go back and listen through them. I think that's some interesting stuff for people listening, especially for the brands who are using external call centers. That was episode 68, brands using call centers. How do they smash results?
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.